My name is Matty Valentine. I'm the anti-trafficking specialist and current operations manager here at Lift International. Lift International is a New Zealand founded NGO based in Chiang Mai, Thailand. This year, Lift International is turning 10 years old. We're raising $10,000 to celebrate 10 years of impact in the fight against human trafficking in Thailand. Since our founding in 2011, we have assisted more than 550 victims of human trafficking. We've helped to arrest more than 332 traffickers and perpetrators, and the sanctions against these perpetrators have achieved more than 3,000 years of imprisonment and conviction. Our survivors were awarded more than $1 million in compensation through the courts. But let's take a step back. Here's some basic information about human trafficking around the world. Human trafficking is a true global problem. Over 40 million people worldwide are trapped in modern slavery. This crime earns traffickers more than $150 billion annually. 4.8 million people are trafficked for sexual exploitation, which in turn brings $99 billion of profit to the perpetrators. What's Lift International's solution? Prevention through prosecution. Stronger justice systems target one of the root causes, traffickers. Our multidisciplinary teams of intelligence, analysts, legal and social work all work together to identify traffickers and support law enforcement in gathering evidence to arrest traffickers and at the same time protect the victims and provide support and resources for them to lead a life of wholeness and dignity. Here's a little bit more about how we began. Our organisation began in 2011 when a group of like-minded people from New Zealand came together committed to tackling the crime of human trafficking. With a Kiwi police officer experienced in doing undercover work, investigating and identifying victims of sex trafficking, they knew there was a huge opportunity to take that knowledge and skill set to make a significant impact on trafficking in Southeast Asia. On the 2nd of September 2011, Invader was born and granted charity status by the New Zealand government. In 2012, we began deploying experienced law enforcement investigators to Bangkok, Thailand. On their first operation, the team identified and assisted women trafficked from Africa. One of the women told the team she prayed that every morning God would help them get out of their dire situation. The women were repatriated and reunited with their families. In 2013, we established a Thai investigation team and we connected with a counter-trafficking organisation which established a working relationship with the local law enforcement. We also began a partnership with donors that provided the initial funding base and operational accountability that allowed our organisation to scale and grow our base of operations in Thailand. In 2014, we added a strategic partnership role to facilitate our growth. Legal and social work roles were brought in to increase support and advocacy for survivors. Two really major accomplishments came from the component of this work.
At that time, when law enforcement teams would arrest traffickers, they would put the trafficking victims in the same room at the same time during the arrest proceedings. The victims would be scared. They thought they were in trouble too. When I started joining law enforcement during the arrest, it was the first time a social worker had ever been present during an arrest. It was the first time I saw how terrified the victims were at that moment. And I saw how much opportunity we had to help them. Not only were the traffickers and victims put in the same room together, but TV and media crews were invited to cover the event and attend a press release which showed victims sitting in rows together with law enforcement. They wanted to show how law enforcement was cracking down on human trafficking. But this was even more traumatic for the victims. They were ashamed and knew their faces would be on the news. From this point, I and my colleagues recommended to law enforcement that they should implement a victim-centered approach so that the victims would be protected and supported during an arrest. We recommended that a social worker should attend all arrests and that the social work team should get 100% responsibility for the victims. We started bringing operation packs to cover immediate needs. We gave them information about their rights, and we made sure that media reporters and camera did not have access to the victims. This was a major shift in how law enforcement treated victims. It was not long before other law enforcement agencies followed suit. Without our involvement, these practices would still be going on and victims would still be further traumatized at the very moment that they are in fact being helped. Because of our work and support, law enforcement all over Thailand know more about victim-centered approach and how to better support human trafficking victims.
In addition to the social worker joining to the arrest for the first time, as a lawyer, I also began attending to arrest. Both social worker and legal become an important part of anti-identifying process, so that we can help keep the victim welfare top priority. Law enforcement are trained to arrest the offender. We bring the art component to also care for the victims. Victims are deeply traumatized by their abuse. Many people overlook ongoing psychological effects. Victim needs crisis care, trauma evaluation, ongoing treatment. This is not easy to find. The victims cannot afford this. By law, victims have a right to fine for the compensations. This means their offender, if convicted, will be ordered to pay money directly to the victim as a portion of their sentencings. This money helps the victim to afford mental and psychological health care they need. Among other expenses, it takes to start life over. But even though this law was in place, it was never awarded to the victims. It was a textbook sanction, but nobody stood up for the victims and put the claim forward. The system focused on punishing the criminal but did not have any consideration for the victims. For the victims, I see them, I feel their pain. I think compensation is really important to them, and I will do everything to claim a compensation for them. Since working with LIFT and together with the public prosecutors, LIFT has been able to get over $1 million New Zealand compensation for the victims. With our help, the survivors are able to get support they need to start a new life free from human trafficking and exploitations.
By 2016, thanks to PIC's legal work, we were seeing a massive growth in victim compensation. We assisted in a major case resulting in 180,000 New Zealand dollars of assets removed and 15 survivors removed from harm. In 2017, we hosted the Asia Regional Anti-Trafficking Conference. This conference brought together a number of other stakeholders to evaluate the best practices in combating human trafficking. By 2018, the anti-trafficking sector had evolved rapidly, and we have grown with it. What started as an investigative team with an emphasis on removing trafficking victims from slavery has grown to encompass strengthening law enforcement and judicial capabilities to prosecute offenders and protect victims from exploitation. In 2018, Invader changed its name to LIFT International to better reflect this growth. While our methods have evolved, we are driven by the same desire: freedom through justice for survivors of human trafficking. In 2019, PIC received the Outstanding Persons Award from Thailand's Prime Minister because of her work representing victims in court for the Black Risk case. This was a massive international case which we partnered with Interpol and the Australian government among other countries. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic brought a drastic change in the modern slavery landscape within Thailand. Perpetrators have turned to the internet to facilitate their abuse. Being confined to their own homes has forced vulnerable victims and their traffickers together. Studies have shown that over 70% of online trafficking cases involve the exploitation of victims by people in their communities. Lift International has adapted to this change by increasing its investigative capacity and digging into these dark places on the internet to find the victims of these crimes and remove them from this devastating harm.